tool recording progress. Okay.
Yeah.
They have a tool called autocoder, which is actually
I
very
see.
Mm.
Wow. Yeah. This definitely like intensive teamwork. Okay. Yeah. Probably we just get started.
Sure.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's CLPR seminar. And so today, I'm very happy and honored to have a wonderful researcher and also my good friend, Professor Xu Duoduo here with us. And so Professor Xu is an assistant professor of sociology and the associate director of the Social Science Research Center at the University of Hong Kong. And so Professor Xu received her PhD in social science from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology in 2017. Her research lies at the intersection of urban sociology, sociology of education, and sociology of work, and primarily focus on child development and the youth employment issue in Chinese cities. And so her work has appeared in many prestigious journals, such as Demographic Research, Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies, British Journal of Sociology, the China Quarterly, Chinese Sociological Review, Work Employment and Society, among others. And so without further ado, today we're going to listen to a very exciting ongoing project. So Dodo, now the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, John, for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. So I heard this is a lunchtime seminar, so please feel free to have your lunch while listening to this talk. This is a very preliminary and also ongoing study. Any comments and suggestions will be much appreciated. But before I get started, I should acknowledge my wonderful research assistants on this project. So one of them is a social scientist. Two of them are computer scientists. And I also have another wonderful research assistant, which is ChatGPT, and you'll see why. First of all, let's talk about the definition of skills mismatch, which is the key concept of this study. How can we understand skills mismatch? Basically, it is the discrepancy between the portfolio of skills possessed by the worker and the portfolio of skills required by his or her current job. So it can happen when there are supply side changes like overeducation due to rapid college expansion, or the demand side changes such as what we call it skill biased technological change or computerization or the AI development in recent years. But skills can be a very broad concept, right? And hard to measure on empirical ground. So very often, for sociologists, we use educational qualifications as a proxy for skills in general. So that's why most studies, at least in this line of research, are actually focusing on education, occupation mismatch. And there are two conceptually distinct dimensions of education occupation mismatch. One is vertical mismatch, like whether or not you have a college degree. So it is a mismatch between workers' educational level and the level of education typically required for their occupation. And there are two different circumstances, right? People can be relatively overeducated. For example, college graduates working as taxi drivers. So usually this is closely linked with an oversupply of college graduates. Like back in the 1970s, American sociologists and economists, they were mainly concerned about the degree inflation problem as an outcome of rapid education expansion. So Richard Freeman had a famous book, The Overeducated American. So on the other hand, undereducation is basically a skills shortage problem. So for example, I have a working paper on vocational education in China. And turns out that in the pre-reform period, like 70s, 80s, many vocational high school students actually achieved exceptionally high occupational status. They become SOE managers or school principals or doctors, partly because of the severe shortages of well-educated personnel at that time. So we didn't have enough high school graduates, not to mention college graduates. And among all those college graduates or highly educated population, mismatch can also happen horizontally, which means a mismatch between a worker's major or field of study and the major or field of study required by his or her occupation. Of course, I should say all fields, all disciplines are born equal, at least, but their graduates actually enter different occupations that pay differently. So sometimes graduates enter those mismatched occupations that typically pay lower than their matched occupations. For example, engineering majors working as sociologists, right? So that's kind of downward mobility if you think about the average payment of different majors. Um, uh, in that case, it is called undermatch. But sometimes graduates enter mismatched occupations that typically pay higher than their matched occupations. For example, liberal arts majors working as bankers after they graduate. In that case, it is overmatch. But of course, here I'm only talking about market value, okay? So instead of social value or intellectual value, let me emphasize that. So why should we care? Why should we care about these mismatches between people's educational qualifications and their occupations? Well, this is because when people's jobs match their skills or qualifications, they're more productive. They're likely to be relatively happy and satisfied with their work and lives. And also, workplaces are adapt to function fairly smoothly and effectively. But when there is a mismatch or lack of fit, a variety of difficulties are likely to happen for workers and their families, and it is not also not a good news for employers and the society at large, because mismatch often leads to the underutilization of human capital and under rewarding of qualifications. For example, there might be a wage penalties when people work in occupations that mismatch their training. And also, in terms of other non-economic outcomes, actually recent evidence show that vertical mismatch is associated with poor psychological well-being and also some poor bio behaviors like obesity and smoking. In terms of the measurement, so as you can imagine, constructing individual level mismatch measures typically involves at least two steps. First, we need to know the requirements, right? Or the matched education for a given occupation. And then we compare a workers or individuals' actual education with the requirement, with the identified match for their occupation. And currently, scholars in this field use three different approaches for determining matched occupation, credentials for specific occupation. First of all, they could use census data. So scholars typically use population census data to they tabulate the observed education distribution of workers for each occupation, and then use the average, the most commonly observed educational level or field of study of workers in that occupation as the match. So this is called realized matches. So I would say this is the most frequently used, but also most problematic measure because it is the result of both demand and supply forces and does not only reflect labor market demands or requirements. So I always use the example that simply because I'm married to my husband does not necessarily mean we are a perfect match, right? So that's realized match. And another approach is to use survey data, asking about workers their self-assessment of the level of qualifications required to get or to do their job. And this is also commonly used measure, right? But such evaluations, as you can imagine, are by definition very subjective, okay? And unlike population census, not all occupations will be covered in social surveys, right? So that's the limitation of this measure. And finally, we could also tell the job requirements based on the assessments of professional job analysts. So for example, I'm sure some of you have heard of the ONET in the US, which provides detailed information about the skills and qualifications needed for every single occupation. So some professionals or job analysts, they could give their judgment about the job requirements based on these job descriptions. So this is actually the most attractive approach in terms of assessing labor market demand because they are based on technology of the job per se. Okay, it is somewhat subjective, but less than self-assessment. But the thing is, it's very costly, and also sometimes the information is not up to date. So as you can see, all current measures of skills mismatch are flawed in some way. Now, with increasing availability of big data like job posting data, there might be a fourth approach for studying skills mismatch. Okay, so if you think about it, job posting data actually perfectly serve our research purposes. So as you can see, each job ad has a title and also a job description that can help us to identify the specific occupation or the types of jobs, which is very similar to the information that we'll get from social surveys or census, right? And it usually tells us what kind of educational qualifications and skills are needed for this job. What's even better, job posting data has all the virtues of big data. It's pretty cheap to collect, at least compared to survey, right? They're super up to date. And if you want to update the information, it is actually quite straightforward. And there's a whole lot of it, right? Sorry. Oops. Okay, so what's really challenging is to find the appropriate tool to process and analyze such big data. So yes, we could use conventional machine learning methods for text analysis, but so far, most machine learning methods, or I could say all machine learning methods, fail to achieve very high accuracy rate on occupation coding task. So I mentioned the US Census Bureau, they have their auto coder, and usually the accuracy rate is roughly 60%. So we know the occupation coding is very, very complex and difficult. Even for experienced human experts, professionals, they're difficult. So I myself find it extremely challenging, not to mention my postdocs, my PhD students. So I can hardly rely on them to clean the data set. And perhaps more importantly, for any machine learning methods to work, we must first have teams of experts to manually label large volumes of data for model training. You must first give them the reference, the correct answer, so that you can train the model, so that they could learn. And this process could be very time-consuming, labor-intensive, and also cognitively demanding. However, the invention of large language models like ChatGPT could be a game changer. So not long ago, when people were doing computational social science research, they worked on each specific small problems by designing specific algorithms. Now, everything is kind of learned by the general foundation models like ChatGPT that can solve various problems and in many ways better than humans. So we all know the size of data is very important for machine learning, but so does the size of model. And those large language models can capture more in-depth patterns and relationships within the text data and are actually better suited for tasks that require a high degree of accuracy and intricacy, like occupation coding. Moreover, utilizing large language models to automate data labeling actually brings fantastic efficiency and stable quality to the process, while simultaneously lowering the cost, the labeling cost to a large extent, as I will show you later on. And finally, pre-training is no longer necessary because these models have already been trained on a vast amount of text data. So your smaller scale models tend to perform worse than these large models. So here's the data we have. So using Python, we scraped over 1 million job postings from 5 major online platforms in Hong Kong in the past year. So we actually started the data collection in 2021, even before the birth of ChatGPT. So I have to admit that I was just blindly collecting the data without thinking much about what I'm going to do with it. But anyway, since the COVID-19 pandemic was officially ended in March 2023 in Hong Kong, so I decided to focus on the post-COVID period only. So we're only using the past year data. So the web scraping was conducted on a monthly basis, and the most recent wave of data was collected in late April this year. So 2/3 of job postings in our dataset are in English, 1/3 are in Chinese. We actually also use ChatGPT to first translate all Chinese job ads into English because although GPT models can recognize different languages, they can recognize Chinese, but they tend to perform much better on English text because they were mainly trained on English text. So we also deleted those duplicated job postings because sometimes the same job ad will be posted on different websites at the same time. So to ensure data representativeness, we deliberately select several popular job posting platforms that cover various types of jobs. I should say a unique feature about Hong Kong's labor market is that not only those higher end white collar professional jobs are posted online, but also those lower end blue collar manual jobs. So for example, the interactive employment service website is run by the government, by the labor department of the Hong Kong government. And many of the jobs posted there are actually blue collar jobs or service jobs. So I think that is a relative advantage of our data set as compared to other data set like the burning glass technology data set because they're biased towards professional and white collar jobs in general. And to convince you that our data set is representative, so here I actually compare the job posting data with official survey data by looking at their industry distributions. So on the supply side, I use data from the general household surveys. On the demand side, I use data from the official job vacancy survey as the comparison. So as you can see, overall, our data is actually more in line with the actual industry distribution of employed workers than the government's job vacancy survey data. And a main reason, I guess, is that the job vacancy survey sample is inevitably biased towards larger size firms, corporations. So when government the survey, they only survey roughly 23,000 employers, but in our data set based on job posting data, it covered more than 63,000 employers. So there are more smaller size corporations or employers in our data set as compared to government job vacancy survey data. So our data quality is pretty good, and it's relatively representative of the local labor market. Then, based on the job posting data, we can extract a wide array of variables from the job postings. But for the purpose of this particular study, we're more interested in people in the types of jobs or occupations, and also the required educational level and field of study from those job postings. So we also look at different general skills usually appear in those job posting data. Like cognitive ability, social ability, calculability, etc., software ability, financial ability, etc. And also because in Hong Kong, actually English language skills is actually pretty important, especially if you want to have get into those well-paid occupations. So in addition to these 10 general skills, we also pay attention to the English language skill. And since the ultimate goal is actually to map, to merge the job posting data with census data to study mismatch, individual level mismatch, and the outcome of that mismatch. So we actually follow the exact same coding scheme used in the Hong Kong census. So the Hong Kong census has adopted the ICE code 08 with local adaptations for occupation coding, and they basically classified all jobs in Hong Kong into 142 different occupations. So we use the exact same coding scheme to classify the jobs into 142 categories. So ideally, we want to use GPT-4 to code all the job postings because it is by far known as the most powerful large language model. The only problem we had was GPT-4 is actually very expensive, at least for my data size. It's going to cost me a lot. If I have unlimited resources, I wouldn't care so much. But because of the resource constraint, we have to think about a more cost-effective way of data coding. And we found that GPT 3.5 indeed is a lot cheaper, but the performance will be significantly poorer than GPT-4. So in the end, we found fine-tuning models. Fine-tuned GPT 3.5 actually appear to be a very cost-effective option because it is much cheaper than GPT-4, but perform much better than GPT 3.5. So for those of you who are not familiar with the terminology, fine-tuning is actually the process of taking pre-trained large language models, and for the training them, on smaller specific data sets to refine their capabilities and improve their performance in a particular task or particular domain. So basically, it's about training general purpose or foundational models and turning them into specialized models. So in our context, occupation coding. Right? So here are our methods. So we first randomly select 30,000 job postings from the full sample, and then we use GPT-4 to translate, clean, and also label those 30,000 job postings. And then this is just a conventional machine learning strategy. So we split the sample into three groups: the training set, the validation set, and test set. And then we compare the relative performance of different models. So we chose two supervised small language models, which usually used in previous studies, CNN and also LSTM. And also we use two self-supervised large language models, which is GPT 3.5 and GPT fine-tuned GPT 3.5. And then we compare their performance. Okay, so we use GPT-4 as the benchmark. Then we see fine-tuned GPT 3.5 actually appears to be the best performing models in terms of the accuracy rate. So the overall accuracy rate is over 90%, which is very similar to the performance of GPT-4. But remember, it is much cheaper than GPT-4. And actually, the cost is actually 1/10 of the cost of GPT-4. So not long ago, OpenAI introduced the new GPT-4o model. So we also tried it out. And the accuracy rate is actually pretty good, over 83%, but still significantly lower than the fine-tuned GPT 3.5. So then we use the fine-tuned model, the fine-tuned GPT 3.5, to process the 20% of our over 1 million job posting data. So here's the outcome. So this figure shows the skill demands by broad occupation categories. So here different colors represent different job skills. So the numbers in cells are proportions of same occupation job ads that require a specific type of job skills. Okay, so remember we try to identify 10 general skills plus the English language skills. So there are 11 different types of skills required in the local labor market. And the percentages are ranked from high to low. So we can quickly observe two interesting patterns here. First, as you can see, higher status jobs or better jobs, well-paid jobs, they usually require a more diverse set of skills. So especially for managerial and professional occupations. So in these job ads, employers more frequently mention various types of skills requirements. And another observation is that some skills are more generally required across occupations, like character skills and social skills. So basically saying that you need to be a nice colleague with good work ethics. So this type of skills are basically required across different types of jobs, as well as English language skills. But for certain skills, they're only required among those higher status jobs, like people management skills, project management skills, financial skills, and software skills. Okay, and not surprisingly, so these skills also tend to be highly rewarded in Hong Kong's labor market. So in our data set, about 40% of job postings actually specifically mention the salaries that the jobs can offer. Of course, this is not a representative sample, right? Because for those really good jobs, like our jobs, so that usually on the job ads, they will only say salaries are highly competitive and commensurate with the experience and qualifications. They don't give you an exact number. So I should say the income information in our data set here should be underestimated, right? But anyhow, we can still roughly estimate the economic returns to various types of skills in the local labor market. So clearly, cognitive and people management skills are highly rewarded in Hong Kong's labor market. So professors, especially professors with some admin duties, deans, department heads, directors. So these are the well-paid jobs in Hong Kong. Well, the economic returns to general computer, maybe just using Microsoft Office, PowerPoint, Excel. So for these general computer skills and also basic writing and customer skills, they are among the lowest. They tend to have the lowest economic returns in Hong Kong. And there's actually a big difference between general computer skills and programming skills or specific software skills. So this is consistent with a paper published by Sui Chen early on. So programming skills and general computer skills are paid very differently. This is a flow diagram that shows the educational level demands by broad occupation categories using our data, using job posting data. So on the left-hand side, we have different types of jobs. On the right-hand side, we have the required educational level of these jobs. So not surprisingly, managerial and professional occupations typically require a bachelor's degree, while technicians and associate professional occupations do not always require a bachelor's degree. And also clerical and service occupations, they typically not require upper secondary education. But in reality, if we look at the actual realized matches using census data, things are quite different. So this is a flow diagram that shows the average education level of workers working in different occupations using the most recent census data in Hong Kong. So this time on the left-hand side, we have workers with different occupational levels, basically the supply, the labor market supply, right? On the right-hand side, we have their current occupations. So as you can see, a considerable amount of college graduates in Hong Kong actually become technicians and associate professionals, or even clerical and service workers. The types of jobs that typically do not require a college degree, right? Which indicates a vertical mismatch or over-education in Hong Kong's labor market. Then what about fields of study or majors? We can also look at the major demands by occupation. So this is based on our job posting data. As you can see, the most in-demand fields, most popular fields in Hong Kong are business majors. Not surprising, right? And also followed by engineering and IT majors, as well as medicine and health. Now you can understand why they are also the most popular fields majors among local students and parents. But again, the realized matches based on census data are a lot messier, okay, in reality. As you can see, although most managerial and professional jobs, they require business majors. But if we look at the actual employment data, the outcome, a large proportion of their graduates actually enter uh, the technician and associate professional occupations, or even clerical and service occupations. So even if you get into these B schools, it's not guaranteed that you can find a matched job after you graduate. On the other hand, surprisingly, although arts and humanities majors, they're not so popular among Hong Kong employers, as you can see from the job posting data. Some of their graduates actually managed to enter those high status occupations. Uh, so for them, it is actually upward mobility, right? And the same pattern applies to science majors as well. So there are quite some discrepancies in terms of the required educational qualifications by employers, and the conventional realized match measures, and our demand side measure. So finally, in order to construct our individual level mismatch measures, we need to link the job ads data with population census data by occupation. So based on our data, for each occupation, we identify the matched education level and fields. So the most commonly observed or required educational level will be treated as the matched educational level. And the four most common fields of study required by these jobs are treated as matched fields. And then we merge the two data sets by occupation. Okay, so we merge the job as data with the census data by occupation. Following previous literature, we restrict our sample to people aged 23 to 50, currently employed, and with post-secondary education or above. So as you can see, when we compare individuals' actual education level of field with the matched or required education for their occupation, we see high rates of or incidences of overeducation and undermatch, much higher than undereducation and overmatch. Okay, so this is also consistent with previous studies, and that is also why the majority of research on skills mismatch focuses on the surplus or underutilization of human capital. However, these rates are still significantly higher in Hong Kong as compared to other countries or regions. So in Hong Kong, over 40% of people are considered overeducated, okay? And more than 30% are considered undermatched. They work in an occupation that typically pay lower than the average salary of their major. So this figure shows the vertical mismatch by field of study. So different majors are ranked from high to low according to the average rates of mismatch. The blue bars represent overeducation, which means people have higher educational levels than actually required for their occupation. So again, as you can see, overeducation is in general very common in Hong Kong, okay, across different majors, but much more common among those service-related majors, such as security services, personal services, transport and logistics services, social services, etc. Right? And this figure shows the horizontal mismatch by field of study. So not surprisingly, social sciences, our major, right? Liberal arts, humanities majors are more likely to work in mismatched occupations, while those lucrative majors like law, health, and even vet majors, they're more likely to work in matched occupations. However, quite surprisingly, I would say some STEM majors, which in the US context, you would think they're good majors, they are also prompt to mismatch problems, like physical science, life science, math and statistics, etc. So in most cases, their graduates end up working in mismatched occupations that typically pay lower than matched occupations for their field. So this is very different from the situation we observed in the US context, where STEM major, science, technology, engineering, math major graduates, they tend to have much stronger education occupation linkage while enjoying a substantial wage premium. So why STEM major graduates are not so popular in Hong Kong? Well, I think this is because of the demand again, okay? So because their skills are not in demand in Hong Kong. And when the demand is weak, the job opportunities will be limited. There will not be many relevant jobs available, and the economic returns will be limited as well. So unlike the US economy, Hong Kong's economy is actually dominated by the finance sector and real estate sector. So we do not have those large tech companies like Apple, Google, Nvidia, Microsoft. So these corporations can observe large amount of STEM major graduates and offer them hands-on salaries. But we don't have that in Hong Kong. And mismatches in general are bad for people's income. Here I use the logged monthly wage as the outcome variable. As you can see, over education, under education, and also under match, they're all significantly negatively associated with people's monthly wage. But the only exception is overmatch. So in that case, people actually achieve upward mobility. They graduate from a not so popular major, but they end up in a well-paid occupation. Of course, that is related to some unobserved characteristics, like network, family background, unobserved ability, etc. So to summarize, in Hong Kong, cognitive skills and people management skills are highly rewarded, but not general computer writing and customer skills. And Hong Kong's workforce in general is severely overeducated. Okay, so people who are still pushing education expansion in Hong Kong should pay attention to this finding, particularly those working in the lower tier service sector. In terms of the horizontal mismatch, individuals who have degrees in social sciences, arts, and quite surprisingly, some STEM fields, they are most prone to be employed in unsuitable positions and usually suffer a wage penalty. So more generally speaking, I think the major methodological contribution of this study is that we proved the demand side job analysis is possible with the use of both big data, the online job posting data, and big model like large language models. And these large language models, they bring the efficiency, the stability to data labeling, making them the future of automated data coding. And maybe we're thinking about hybrid labeling, combining human experts with these AI tools. And that could be a better or more pragmatic approach that could leverages the strength of both and to achieve the highest level of accuracy and efficiency. In terms of future plans, so right now we're using GPT-4 as our model answer, but that could be problematic too, right? So they could make mistake as well. So now we're thinking about we could actually simultaneously use different AI tools or large language models to organize a panel of evaluators. So this is very similar to the occupation coding using human experts. So we can hardly trust that one always make the correct judgments. So what we do is to have multiple evaluators and assessors. So this is kind of like a jury. So, and we hope that by combining the judgments from multiple diverse large language models through a principled voting scheme, we could actually improve the accuracy rate of our evaluations or coding. And finally, in addition to those economic outcomes, we could also merge the job posting data with other social survey data to look at other outcomes like how mismatch affect people's psychological states and their physical mental health. And finally, thinking about the Hong Kong version ONET. So constructing an ONET-like database will be very expensive for individual researchers, but maintaining and updating it regularly will be even more costly. And if you think about the rapid and substantial changes in Hong Kong's job market over the past few decades, and possibly in future decades as well, we actually need to find a cost-effective way to collect and process up-to-date labor market demand or job requirement information. And maybe the AI-assisted approach I just introduced here could be a way, could be a ticket for moving forward. I think I'll stop here. Thank you. And all comments and questions are welcome.
Thank you, Dodo, for this very exciting project. I have learned so much. So now the floor is open for comments, questions. Sunhu, I assume you have a question?
Yes, yeah.
Right. You may
Thank you.
start, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, Dodo. So, I have several questions. My first question is about the measure of over-education. So, because for some job postings, they just say that they so the education requirement, for example, is at least bachelor or at least master. Then, if some people is PhD, then how can you define this is over education or this is just a match? Yeah. And also some jobs, they also require some relevant work experience in addition to relevant education degrees. So then do you think it's also necessary to consider relevant work experience? So then the third question is just a clarification question. Maybe I've missed something. So in terms of the horizontal mismatch, can you clarify again what does over and under match mean? Because for me, horizontal is just match or not match. Yeah. So yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. So
thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for your questions, Sunghu. These are all very good questions. So let me answer your last question first. Now we're also looking at the average payment of all the workers graduated from the same major. And if graduates, they work in a mismatched occupation that typically pay higher than the matched occupation of their fields, then that is overmatch. If lower, then undermatch. So we're simultaneously taking into account the average payments of the matched majors and mismatched majors.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
And for your second question about the working experience, I think that is a valid and very good point, actually. So we do have information about the required working experience in our job posting data. But since in this particular study, we're focusing on education and occupation mismatch. So I don't know how to fit in this variable into this particular study. But I think a relevant point is that actually the labor market for more experienced workers and less experienced workers could be completely different, right? So I think a way to solve this problem is to do subsample analysis, right? So now we're just looking at all workers from different age groups, but it is possible to, for example, focus on more for younger workers or recent labor market entrants, because at least for our job posting data, I think they're the requirements recently. But if someone who graduated like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when they enter the labor market, the requirements may be quite different, but there's no way that we could know such requirement using our job posting data. So I think that could be a possible way to address this concern. And finally, I think you're absolutely right. So in those job postings, if they want to attract more applicants, they tend to only list out the lowest requirements, okay, so that they could attract more people to apply. But in reality, in terms of the actual hiring decision, the bars may be much higher, right? So that is also exactly why there is a discrepancy between the realized match measure using the census data and the requirements using the job posting data. So that is also a reason for over education. So because although you don't require me to have like a college degree or from graduate from a fancy major, but in reality to compete with other job applicants to really get the job, the actual realized match may be have much higher standard. So I think that perfectly explain the discrepancy between different measures, mismatch measures we observe here. So thank you for the questions. These are all really good questions.
I think there are two additional questions in the chat box. Like one from Yunye Liu about how did you link job posting data to individual level data? Like he wants to know more about the technical details. And then another one from Prof. Erin Ong about the reason why undereducation leads to lower earnings.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the second question?
Why undereducation leads to lower earnings?
Under education leads to
yeah.
Okay. Let me answer the first question first. So in terms of how to link the two data sets, is actually pretty straightforward. So we tabulate the education requirements for each occupation in our job ads data, and then we identify the most common education level as the match level, and the four most common fields of study as the matched fields. And then for the census data, we also tabulate the workers by occupation to see for people who now work in these occupations, what are their actual educational level and fields. Then at individual level, we can see whether they're relatively overeducated or undereducated as compared to the specific requirements of this particular occupation based on our job ads data. I hope that explains the procedure. And in terms of why undermatch leads to lower income. I think this is quite easy to understand because by definition, if you graduate from a good major, a lucrative major, but you end up with a occupation that pays typically lower than your matched major, then that means something. Of course, that directly affect your monthly wage, but that also means you have some attributes that make you perform worse than your peers who graduated from the same major but end up in a matched occupation. But of course, there are some unobserved features that we can hardly observe. So this is not a causal relationship. Rather, we should understand it as a correlation. So thank you for the questions.
Sorry, can I clarify? This is Irene.
Yeah, of
Oh,
course.
sure, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
So I'm trying to understand the under education variable then. I thought it meant that you are your qualifications is lower than required of the job. What you just explained is mismatch, is horizontal
Oh, sorry.
mismatch. Yeah.
Sorry,
Right. So I'm
sorry.
trying to understand the result on this slide on under education.
Oh, right. Thank you. Sorry for misunderstood your question. So for under education, I think this happens more often. So as far as I understand, this happens more often among those older workers. So maybe in the past, you don't really need a college degree to work as department secretary in higher institution in the old days, right? But now it typically requires a college education. So according to today's standard or requirement, you are undereducated. And also at the same time, because of you are, of course, you're more experienced, but you're older and than your co-workers who recently entered the same occupation and with the college degree, that puts you in a relatively disadvantaged position. Um, uh, but there's no way to tell whether this is true. The only way is to do, as I said, do the subsample analysis. But as you can imagine, if someone's educational qualification or training is not sufficient, not enough to fill the requirements of their current job, then that may lead to a wage penalty. They're less likely to be promoted and they're less likely to receive additional rewards from this job. So that's my intuition.
Prof. Ong, does Dodo answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I have a question about the mechanism that link field of study to the mismatch outcomes. So especially that you have such rich data regarding like the requirements of like different qualities that would qualify each individual to a certain type of jobs of different prestige. And so to what extent that it's actually the mechanism that link the like individuals from different study backgrounds to a promising or unsatisfactory like employment outcome. And so, for example, the fact that those from humanities or social science backgrounds tends to land jobs that are more mismatched. Is that possible because of the like lack of more specialized skills or lack of management skills or something else? And so I think that would actually speak to like a very realistic implications that what is exactly lacking, or what is exactly promoting the marketable values of graduates from different study backgrounds. But I understand there might be difficulties because this field of studies is more about the supply side, but then the mismatch is more observed and the requirements is more observed on the demand side. But if there's possible ways to link it through, I think it would give us more informative understanding about the processes.
Oh, well, I think this is a wonderful comment, Joan. So actually, that's the fundamental problem with actually within this line of research, studying skills mismatch or education occupation mismatch problem. So how can we understand the wage penalty caused by mismatches? Is it something related to the majors per se, or the workers' attributes, or the types of training and skills they obtain through these education, higher education? And I think the only way to answer that question is to look at the curriculum, the courses that these graduates took when they were studying different majors. So actually, one of my students is thinking about doing this, but as you can imagine, collecting such kind of data is quite difficult. But I think to answer this question, we need to go beyond the mere link between educational qualifications and labor market outcomes, but also look into the actual skills students or graduates they obtain through the higher education, and how does this relate to their later labor market outcomes. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dodo. I see now we already run over time. Is there any last question or a burning comments or anything? If not, let's put our hands together and thank Prof. Xu for this wonderful presentation. I believe that everyone has learned a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was seeing the frontier of how empirical methodologies can carry us to better understand the society, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dodo.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, and thank you, everyone. And hope all will have a good weekend.